another episode of the King's Information Network podcast. We are definitely in the final act of Nothing's Ever Easy, with only a few chapters left to go. I think I figured out it should be done around early December. More on what comes next later. But in the meantime, let's pick up with chapter 33. I believe our chances of escaping just increased tenfold, Jay said quietly in the thoughtful silence that followed Bry's departure. I looked at him. Was escape really possible? If anyone could do it, it would be Bry, I agreed slowly. Maybe things were looking up. Maybe we had a real chance to get back to our Cavern Hall family. We just couldn't let Rees get a whiff of the fact we knew Bry. Oh shit, I breathed as the realization hit me. What? Jay demanded. I didn't tell Bry that Rees knows his full name. Bry shouldn't know his full name. If Rees tries anything... My brother's nothing if not quick on his feet, and I sincerely doubt that's changed too much. He'll cover if anything happens before tomorrow evening. I didn't quite have Jay's faith in the matter, but there was nothing I could do about it. I did, however, trust that Bry would come up with a plan to get us out, and that it would most likely work. With any luck, he'd be able to find Jessie and Rye as well for backup. For now, our only big obstacle continued to be the obnoxiously brilliant Colonel Trigger Rees. His cheery, "Morning, Jasmine," came far too soon, considering how long I'd laid awake the night before. I made myself match his cheeriness. "Good morning, Trigger." He raised his eyebrows. "You seem in a good mood." "Is that not allowed?" Rees smirked and turned his gaze to Stella and Dave. I tensed. "Stella and David Harper, yes?" "Yes," Stella said cautiously. He studied them for too many anxious heartbeats. "You had a brother who was part of the Freedom Fighters." Stella lifted her chin defiantly. "We did." He stroked his chin, nodded, and turned back to me. "Come along, Jez. It's time for us to chat." "Oh, joy. Just what I was hoping for this morning," I said, getting painfully to my feet. The beating at the hands of Juke and his pal had left my legs feeling weak when I stood. Rees opened the cell and gestured me out. Juke stood just down the hall and smiled at me with all his teeth. I refused to flinch as Rees put his hand on my elbow and steered me down the hall. For the first time since my shoulder injury, he led me to the small interrogation room. I shot a glare at Juke, and I wondered about the lack of Kilgore. "Remember our last meeting here?" "Nope. Our first," I told him, turning to face him as he shut the door behind us. To my satisfaction, he paled at the reminder. "What's the question this time?" "Which question?" "Whatever your dumb question is for the day. What do you want me to tell you this time?" "Fine, then. Who's Brighton?" I think I started a bit, but hoped he assumed it was due to being annoyed, not anxious. I stared at him, trying to figure out his angle. "Why are you so insistent on getting me to talk about Brighton?" "Did you always call him Brighton? That seems like quite the mouthful. I'm sure he had a nickname. Bry, perhaps?" His gaze held mine, sharp and ready for the slightest flicker from me. He'd waited too long for that to happen, though. And why should I tell you if we did? "Why should you tell me anything, Jez? It saves you from some pain. I see you're rather stiff right now." "It's what getting beaten up does to a person." "How about you answer the question?" "As if it will ever be that easy." I folded my arms. "Let me go back to my cell, if that's all you've got." He grinned. "Oh, I have so much more, Jasmine. Did Brighton have a nickname?" Juke stepped closer to me meaningfully. "So I lied. We only called him Brighton. He loved his name, and it's what he'd grown up being called. End of story. Aren't you so glad you've been obsessing over it?" "And if I were to ask Jay?" "Brighton died before Jay ever joined," I said, which was not a lie, really. "If you say so," he said before glancing at Juke. "Where's Dayton?" "Getting the prisoner with Kilgore," he grunted. I stiffened. "Which prisoner?" I demanded. "You'll find out soon enough." "If you touch David again, I swear to the gods," I snapped, taking a step towards him before Juke's hand landed heavily on my shoulder and squeezed. I bit back a squeak as pain shot down my arm. "I do believe that's the first bit of real anger I've seen out of you since our initial chat. Should I be worried about your control? Why don't you push me a little more and see?" I had no doubt, should I lose control, he'd be very sorry. Last time I'd broken out of both the brute's grips. This time, there was only one between us. He hummed and took a step towards me. On instinct, not nearly angry or off-kilter enough to snap. To be honest, I wasn't sure something even as serious as this would be enough. I backed towards Juke. "What was it last time?" he said. "Ah, yes. I went to touch your scars. You seem rather sensitive about them." He took another step forward. "I wouldn't suggest trying it again. You're even less defended this time." Now I forced myself to hold my ground, eyes locked on his. "This is true, but I'm also a lot more prepared. I know what to expect." He twitched his hand, which drew my attention to it. He held a short but sharp knife in one hand. I took a deep breath, cautioning myself to calm. I don't see why you're so squeamish about them, he said, softly, almost gently. I'm not squeamish. My voice sounded tight and strained, even to my own ears. Then why can't I touch them? Because they're mine, not yours. There's very little that's yours right now, Jasmine. Don't touch them, Trigger. He stood mere inches from me, almost nose to nose. Or what? I will kill you, I said flatly, and found I meant it, even with my vision clear. I took a deep breath and let it out slowly, holding his gaze again. Indeed, he murmured. Then, to my vast astonishment, he reached out towards my face. I knew I had a few scars visible at the edge of my hairline. I stumbled back into Juke's bulk, not that it was nearly far enough away. Still, it turned out there was no need, and the second before his fingers landed, Jay grabbed him by the shirt and spun, slamming him into the wall, the knife clattering away. Or maybe, he growled lowly, I will kill you if you touch her. Got it? Jay, I managed, mind railing, trying to come down from the adrenaline too quickly. You okay? Kilgore and Dayton stood in the doorway, stunned. Juke still had his hand on my shoulder, but hadn't moved further. Yeah, when did you get here? A moment ago. Get him off, Rees sputtered, trying to pry Jay's grip off his collar. My friend gave no ground. Dayton, in yet another surprise, was the first to move. But with a slight shift, I stuck out a foot. The short man hit it and went sprawling into me and Juke, but it wasn't Jay and Rees, so I considered it a win. Careful there, Dayton. Better watch your step, I admonished. You, he sputtered, trying to get back up. I shifted, throwing him off balance again as he tried to straighten. Juke shoved past me, throwing me back towards the corner to help Kilgore pull Jay off the colonel, pushing him into the wall against the wall in turn. Before the brutes could begin beating Jay, Rees straightened his shirt and held up a hand to stall them. Juke, please grab Jasmine before she does harm to Dayton. With a glare, the brute shuffled over, pulling me away from Dayton. I didn't fight it. Shooting me a nasty look, Dayton stumbled, but caught his balance again. Rees returned his gaze to Jay, who was still firmly pressed against the wall. James, you are very lucky there will be nothing more than a bruise from your little stunt. Jay still radiated raw fury, so I reached out a hand, clasping his. Thank you. Although he held me tightly, I could feel some of the tension leak out, and he nodded slightly, eyes fixed on Rees. Well now, this is adorable. Shut up, Rees, we said in concert. Jay glared. Most of my anger had ebbed away at Jay's arrival. Dave was safe. His grin widened. I don't understand you, he said finally. You're fiercely protective of each other, but when I do this... He gestured, and Kilgore hauled off with his free hand and caught Jay in the face, neatly splitting his lip. Jay wiped at it, gaze taking a second to refocus, his own anger draining. I winced sympathetically and squeezed his hand. You don't try and protect him. There are levels of protection. To get you to stop now, I'd have to give you something in exchange, and that would threaten more of our friends. Here, we can control who's threatened and suffers for it. Plus, when we're not visiting with you, we can mock you to our heart's content and get all the excess anger out, Jay said, swiping at his lip with more direction. Along with your cellmates. I didn't like his interest in Stella and Dave at all, and freshly cursed Dacamar and Opalyn. We're friendly people, and we're all in the same boat. Can you blame us? You're also willing to risk your lives for them after a month. Month and a half, I corrected mildly. My mental math put us around 40 days. Rees flopped a hand at us. Semantics. That doesn't explain why. It's just a kid and his sister, whose brother and mother lost their lives to a cause which we've spent months and years working on. Not to mention your attack on them turned a 10-year-old into a murderer. It's the least we could do for them. And the only thing currently, Jay said evenly, like that didn't bother him. With any luck, we could do a lot more soon. Rees pursed his lips, looking us both over slowly, eyes settling on our clasped hands. Very well. I have some other business to attend to. Dayton, please escort them back to their cell. Uneasiness settled in my stomach. Had he gotten something out of us that I hadn't noticed? You have other business? Jay gasped. I am deeply and severely hurt that we aren't your only work right now. He clapped our hands over his heart dramatically. I snorted. Rees rolled his eyes. Don't make Kilgore punch you again, he said before turning smartly on his heel and leaving. Dayton waited a minute after he left, glaring at both of us, before gesturing for the brutes to bring us and stomping out in the lead. He said nothing as we made our way back to the cell, and he let us in, slamming the door right on our heels. I shot him a glare of my own as he and the brutes left. Thanks, I told Jay. Your timing was as impeccable as ever. I figured you could take him, but it might mean more coming from me, since he's obviously not getting the message from you. I don't think anything really will, I said dryly. You okay? Oh yeah, Rees went surprisingly light considering. Yeah, what was that all about? He shook his head. I don't know, but I kind of wish I did. I had to agree as I settled down in my usual corner. Jay sat too, and at Stella's raised eyebrows explained what had happened. I half expected to see Rees again later, even if it was just to gloat over picking up something that I'd missed, but there was no sign of him all afternoon, even as the light outside faded. So concerned over Rees, I'd forgotten that Bry was on dinner duty until he crouched by the bars. Anyone hungry? He said with a wide grin. Usually I'd say yes, but not with the same old slop, Jay said, but took it when I was past it from Bry. Soon, his brother promised. Hi, you must be Stella and David. Stella smiled. Nice to meet you, Bry. You look a lot like Jay, Dave said. No, Bry said, winking. Jay looks a lot like me. I came first, after all. The boy grinned. Good point. Jay snorted. Got any news for us? As a matter of fact, I do. It just so happens that Kira works nearby at the Blue Parrot Inn. And guess who the newest employees are? My eyes narrowed. Who? Oh, come on, guess, he wheedled. It can't be Jessie and Rye. He beamed. Why, yes, it can be. You're shitting us. Nope, they chose the Blue Parrot precisely because it was near the prison. I met with them last night to do some planning. We're going to strike in 1 week. All you need to do is be ready when we come. I got news when I came in that the regular guy will be back tomorrow, so I'm not sure I'll be able to sneak back much at all. But 1 week. Are you sure there's nothing we can do to help? I asked. You're a little stuck, he pointed out. Thanks for the reminder, Jay said sourly. Fine, you can make sure Colonel Rees doesn't get wind of it. Dave frowned, shrinking back against Stella. He won't, will he? No, of course not. We're all very smart people, Bryce said solemnly. And 8 brains are smarter than 1. Even a scarily intuitive one. I'm not sure this is making me feel any better, Jay muttered. Shush, Bryce said. I'm sure it'll be fine, David. Do we get to know the plan? It's pretty simple. I distract the guard by pretending I lost something. Kira follows me in and takes him out while I'm being a distraction. We take the keys, let you out, and go to the safe house to meet Jessie and Rye. I stared at him and then exchanged a glance with Jay. Is that all? Yep. But that's really easy, Jay said, perplexed. Hence simple. Do you have a problem with it? No, but your plans are usually more elaborate. How do we get out of the city? I asked at the same time. We figure Jessie and Rye's present will send the city into enough chaos that we can sneak out while they're trying to figure out what happened. Everything goes boom, Jay said with satisfaction. Boom? Stella asked. They're blowing up the Greensward Castle. Or at least parts of it, I said amused. Boom, Jay agreed. Bryce sighed and shook his head. And people call me immature. There is now absolutely nothing immature about liking things going boom. I had to laugh. Of course not, James. He stuck his tongue out at me. I will let you know updates as I can, but I don't guarantee anything. I don't want to be here too often when I'm not supposed to be, at the risk of getting the Colonel's attention. Of course, I said, although I didn't like the idea of being left out of the loop. Still, if it came down to a chance of rescue, or no chance at all, I could handle it. Hang in there, he said sympathetically. We will, Jay told him. Be careful. Always, he said, but he didn't try and fool us with a cocky smile. Rees obviously made Bry nervous, too. I'd better get going. Good night, Jay. Jez. Good night, Bry, Jay said. I echoed him, and Dave waved. A second later, Bry was gone. I watched after him, and then set into my food. Nothing left to do but wait. Bry did not come back to the Blue Parrot the next night, as agreed. He didn't usually come often, and 2 nights in a row might raise some suspicion. Kira promised she'd update them with any information he had as soon as she saw them the next day. Colonel Rees, on the other hand, did appear, settling at the bar towards the tail end of the dinner hour. Rye was out doing some errands, but Jessie sat only a couple seats down from him, having been talking to Kira occasionally and sipping at an ale. So, Rees asked Kira as she wiped down the bar in front of him, what is Bry short for? I assume Brian. He's never been able to tell me, obviously, so we don't discuss it much. Could it be short for Brighton? Jessie was glad that Kira was facing her when he asked, because her expression flickered to shock for a split second before she schooled it. Suppose it could be, the other woman said. What do you think? Brighton is an unusual name. Bry isn't, hence my assumption. But it's possible. She shrugged, turning to look at him. Anything's possible, sir, she said mildly. Rees smiled. That is very true, Kira. Okay, he waved away her offer to get him a drink. I have business. I appreciate your time as always. With that, he left the bar, although he paused a couple times to talk to various soldiers before disappearing out the door. Kira and Jessie exchanged a glance, but didn't dare say anything. The next day, Kira filled Jessie and Rye in about Bry's conversation with Jez and Jay. In the late afternoon, while Jessie was also working, Bry skipped in. He settled an empty space at the bar, said hi politely to Jessie, then started drawing something on a piece of paper, chatting lightly with Kira as he did. Good afternoon, Kira, Colonel Rees said as he strolled in maybe 20 minutes after Bry. Bry hunched his shoulders, keeping his focus on whatever he was drawing. Jessica, he added, as he slid onto a seat at the bar as well, waving to the soldiers. Sir, Jessie said neutrally. Ladies, may I please have a drink? Something stronger than water, but not too strong, as the day's still young. What's the occasion? Kira asked, moving to grab one of their easily watered-down alcohols. We finally scheduled the hangings for the 4 prisoners. We've needed them for a while, but their usefulness is at an end. I'm sure Bryce mentioned them. They've been quite a focus for us recently. Bryce stiffened before he returned to his scribbling. Jessie pretended all her focus was on a particular spot at the bar, scrubbing at it. Yes, he has. The 2 were the pair who blew up the depot a month or so back, right? Indeed. What's the date? Jacob will want to know, for business. 2 days from today. That math was dead simple. Jessie swallowed hard. Ah, well, that means business will be good that night, Kira said in unconcern, passing the colonel his drink. Indeed. You'll be there, won't you, Bry? Rees asked, acknowledging the other man's presence for the first time. Bryce scrambled to his feet, practically saluting. Yes, sir, I will be, sir. Unless you want me to cover at the prison, sir. Jessie eyed him, not particularly liking this side of Bry. Felt too unnatural to her, but Kira glanced her way and winked. Jessie wondered if Bry had cultivated this act from the beginning, even before he knew who he was. I don't bite, Bry, Rees said mildly. Yes, sir, of course not, sir. What about you, Kira? Rees now asked, turning back to the bar. Will you be there? I don't think I've seen you at one before. I normally make sure the Blue Parrot's ready for the crowds that will be here until late. I think you should be there. I'll try my best, Colonel, but I don't usually have the time to fight my way back here to be here on time. If you've noticed my absence, I'm sure you've noticed Jacob's as well. Ah, yes, but you have more staff now. How about you, Jessica? Will you or Ryan be there? I doubt it, sir. If it's going to be that busy, it'll be all hands on deck here, even with the extra staff. Plus, my sister is very squeamish. Rye would have hit her if she'd heard that description. Rees stared at her evenly for a heartbeat too long. Very well. Brighton, do you have work tonight? Jessie's heart lurched in the intervening breath, and Kira froze for a second, but Bry didn't miss a beat. What'd you call me, sir? That's not my name, sir. I mean, maybe it could be, I guess, sir, but I don't know. Rees now studied him as Bry wrung his hands. Of course. I was thinking of the prisoners. One of them knew Brighton a few years back. I must still have that on my mind. It's okay, sir, of course. I just don't want to be confused, sir. He nodded. Do you think it is? Does it ring any bells? No, sir, none at all. Does Brian? Bry shook his head in wide-eyed ignorance. Rees downed the drink. I'll have a glass of water now, he ordered, and returned his attention to Bry. Either way, are you working tonight? Yes, sir, but I'm back to my regular duties. I start in an hour. So I thought I'd come see Kira and do some drawing. There was a note of pride in his voice, like a child's pride. What are you drawing? Bry held up a surprisingly comprehensive map of Greensward. Even Kira looked a little startled, and she'd been watching him. Jessie knew he had a sharp memory and an eye for details. The city, he said. Kira worries that I'm going to get lost, so I'm making a map. Does it look right, sir? Rees took it, studying it critically, and without any seeming suspicion, although he had to have some if he was announcing the hanging. It looks good to me, Bry. I see you have the Blue Parrot and your apartment starred. Yes, sir. To remind me, so I know how close or far from them I am, sir. The colonel studied it for another minute, then nodded, handing it back. I should head back to the prison. I'll see you in an hour, Bry. Yes, sir. Please add the 2 drakes to my tab, Kira. Of course, Colonel. Jessie knew from the other woman that he always insisted on paying for his water, too. As soon as Rees had disappeared out the door, Jessie drifted towards Kira and Bry. Bry waited until they were close before saying softly, He's lying. He has to be. Jessie marveled at the change in his demeanor as he regarded them. How can you be sure? She asked. Because hangings for proven freedom fighters have to take more time than that. Good point. Even hangings for the more run-of-the-mill criminals take longer, Kira agreed, relaxing slightly. Exactly. You need to set up the square to start with, and there's been no sign of movement there, and Kira and I have to walk through it every day to get to work. And they'd probably want Opalyn and Dagmar down here, since they both visited since their capture. They have? Jessie asked. That was news to her. Bry flapped a hand at her in a clear later gesture. And they need time to get free and get here. Plus, they usually offer more warning than that, because the city will pretty much shut down for a couple of hours, Kira said. Okay, so he was bluffing then. To what end? Jessie asked. Does he somehow suspect some of us? I don't think directly, but if one of them mentioned my name like it sounds like, then it's possible that deep down Rees is connected to the dot, or at least strongly suspects that I'm the same Bry. It seemed clear enough when he tried to trip me up. And I think if he figures if we're innocent, then word will spread to the hangings, and it might flesh out any actual freedom fighters, Kira pointed out. Bar and waitstaff are notorious gossips. Then we'll get spreading, Jessie said. No reason to give him any more reason to suspect us. She polished the bar near them. He's already suspicious. We need to be even more careful and hope Jez, Jay, and their cellmates are up to the challenge as well, Brian murmured, looking down at his map. It's only 5 more days, Kira said. That's all we need to hold him off for. Thank the gods for small favors. Why a map? Jessie asked. It's not suspicious, and I thought they might be helpful the night of. I'll make each of us one and mark the important places with some various signs that won't be obvious to anyone but us. She had to smile. Brilliant, she told him, before moving to respond to the waving from a table of soldiers. Ren woke the morning after his wedding and found that nothing had changed. He still wore his pajamas, and Annie was still tucked under his arm, as she often was these days, fast asleep. She supposed the fact that neither of them had woken up with a nightmare might make it special, but it didn't seem like enough. Annie seemed to sense the fact he was awake, because she rolled over to face him with a sleepy smile. "Morning, husband." He had to smile back. "Good morning. Sleep all right?" She nodded. "Would have been better if we could have had a proper wedding night," she said lightly. Undoubtedly." He shifted to kiss her gently. "We'll just have to content ourselves with this." She nodded. They both knew, even without discussing it, that neither would risk her getting pregnant with things as they were now. If she had his child, it would give Vladimir a further hold on the throne. With an heir, he could have Ren killed in an accident, install himself as regent, and there would be little that anyone could do about it. Despite the three's background, they were now properly married, which made any child of theirs a legitimate heir. That, in turn, would eliminate any of Ren's more distant relatives who might try to make a claim. And the kissing certainly wasn't bad. They'd done quite a bit of it the night before, after all, until Annie had felt guilty about leaving Sorin to the party wolves, and they'd gone to make an awkward appearance. "Can I move in?" Annie asked after a quiet minute. "What?" He was caught off guard by the sudden question. "Can I move in?" He met her eyes. "Are you sure you want to?" She poked him hard in the side. "Don't ask me that again." He squirmed. "You know why I am. And I don't care. Rennie, I love you, and I want to be able to enjoy this as much as we can while it lasts." He pressed his lips together. "If you want to move in, I would love it. We can rearrange however you want, and I have some drawer and closet space. I don't have much in the way of clothes these days." She smiled. "I've never been one for a lot of clothes, so we should fit just fine." "I think we already fit just fine." "Aw, that was wonderfully sappy of you," she teased, patting his cheek. "You are evil." She just kissed him. "Do we have to move anything?" she asked, once she seemed to think she had him properly cowed. "Well, no, but it might be nice." Annie stared at him before pushing herself to a seat. He followed suit, a little concerned now. "What is it?" "Sorin and I talked yesterday, early, before the wedding, about a lot of things, but he really thinks your brother and the freedom fighters are going to win when they attack, that they have the advantage." She hesitated, especially with Vlad not really being himself these days. "Okay, what does that have to do with rearranging my room?" "I think Sorin's going to send me away, so I'm not here when that happens." "So you're safe," he said softly, understanding now. They would have even less time than he'd thought, but the chances of her dying either in fighting or being hung as a traitor were also probably now much smaller, and he did not wish that on her at all. He had meant the vows the day before, even if most wouldn't believe him, and who knew if he'd get a chance to argue in her favor when the attack came. She nodded, reaching out to cup his cheek with her hand. "We knew it wouldn't last." "I know. I guess for a moment yesterday, I thought maybe." "I know," she echoed, smiling a little. "We have for now, so we'll just have to enjoy it as much as we can in the meantime." He wanted to be free, but he wanted Annie to be there too. The freedom fighters' hopeful forthcoming victory suddenly felt a little bit bittersweet. "You'll take care of—" That was as far as he got, before Annie shifted her hand to cover his mouth. "No, not now. Not yet. I'm not gone yet." Ren pressed his lips together. "Okay, not yet." She smiled, bringing her other hand up. "I love you, my king," she whispered. He leaned forward and kissed her hard. Chapter 34. The next week passed at a snail's pace. Rees had Jay and I each dragged out of the cell twice, but despite obvious pressure from above, he seemed stymied as to what to ask us. He was suddenly stuck on the same few questions, especially about Bry. His attempts at deduction were strangely off base. Despite a few new bruises for being impertinent, we walked away each time unscathed. I didn't say anything, but it made me nervous. There was no discernible reason for the change, and although a part of me was grateful for the reprieve, a larger part wondered what Rees still had up his sleeve. I could only hope it wasn't somehow an awareness of our plan. Still, I shushed the others whenever it started to come up, even though I had ample reason to believe we wouldn't be overheard, considering a lot of what we'd said before. The night of the planned rescue, I stood, bouncing in place by the doorway. I wanted to pace, but with Jay and Dave asleep, there wasn't room. Stella alternated between watching me and listening hard for sounds of footprints. "I'm sure he'll be here. He doesn't seem the type to renege on a promise," she whispered as the night crept later. It had to be after midnight. At that precise moment, I heard soft footsteps coming our way, and I spun to crane my neck, trying to see down the hallway. Even with only half the torches lit for the evening, Bry's familiar outline was unmistakable. He was trailed closely by a woman I didn't know, but I guessed was the aforementioned girlfriend Kira. Bry grinned as he reached us. "Ready for an epic escape, my friends?" "Are we ever?" I said, nudging Jay in the side with my foot to wake him. "Great! Gang, this is Kira. Kira, this is the gang." She and I rolled our eyes at the same time. "Where are Jessie and Rye?" I asked, even as Bry slid the key into the door and opened it. "No worries, Jez. As planned, they went to make things go boom." "Without me?" Jay said, scrambling to his feet and pasting a pout on his face. "No fair. Would you rather we left you here?" As if. He winced a bit and rubbed at his legs. The brutes had obviously done something to it the day before, and it definitely still hurt. "You okay?" Kira asked. I took an instant to study her. She stood at least a half foot shorter than Bry, but wore a sword like she knew how to use it, which is really the only thing that mattered to me right now. "Just sore," he said cheerfully. "Rees can be a vicious bastard when he wants, and when I get all salty." "Can you walk all right? We've got a long night ahead of us," Bry asked in obvious concern. Jay wagged a finger at him. "No babying the younger brother. I'll keep up. It's just stiff." I doubted that part, but I did trust that nothing would hold any of us back from this bid for freedom. "Yes, sir," Bry said, and tossed us each a bundle. "Fresh clothes so the stink doesn't attract attention. We even found some that shouldn't be too big on you, David." The boy smiled shyly. "Thank you." It took a few minutes for first Stella and I, then Dave and Jay to change, but I figured it was worth the time wasted. "All right, gang, let's move out," Bry said, leading the way down the hallway. "Introductions time. Kira, this is my little... Jay. Younger," Jay corrected with a nasty look. "Brother. And then this is Jez, who I know now is one of my best friends, and Stella and David. Everyone, this is Kira, my girlfriend." "Hi," she said and smiled. "Bry's been telling me a lot about you and Jay," she told me, since his memories have started to return. I opened my mouth, but Jay spoke over me. "Wait, let me see the keys," he said, reaching over to pluck them from his brother's hand. "What? Why? Does anyone have an extra set?" "Somewhere, sure, but not here at the prison." "Good. We don't need them again, right?" Bry shook his head, clearly puzzled. "And you locked the guard in a cell, yes?" This time a nod. Jay tossed them into the nearest cell as we passed. "Guess the guard will be stuck for a while. Pity." Stella stifled a laugh and offered a hand for a high five. As we reached the front entry, which I only vaguely remembered being brought in, Kira pointed at a small pile of weaponry. "I found this tucked behind the desk. I'm guessing some of it's yours?" "It is," I said, brightening. I grabbed my sword and strapped it back in place. I felt myself relax a little at its familiar weight. Although it doesn't quite have the same sentimental value anymore, I patted it and grinned at Bry. It took him a second. "Oh, is that the one I got you?" I nodded as I got my knife settled as well. "Ready?" Kira asked, as Stella finished testing the string on a bow and settled a dagger on her hip. Dave stood near the window, whose shutters were cracked, hands clenched tightly around the hilt of a knife Jay had found for him. I think we're in trouble," he said in a small voice without looking back at us. "What?" Bry, the closest, moved to his side and peered out. He went pale. "I guess we didn't fool Rees very well after all." I swallowed hard, fighting against the panic that threatened. We had to get out. "They're sure to have the back door covered, too. God's damn," Bry muttered, pulling Dave away from the window and back to the desk. "What about Rees's office?" I asked, almost before my brain had caught up with the why. "That has a big window. Maybe they don't have it covered." "Brilliant," Bry said. "It's certainly worth a try. Come on." He led the way through the prison and pushed open the door, peeking in before beelining for the window. He edged closer, looking out in every direction as the rest of us piled into the room. "No one," he reported, "but as soon as we break the window, they'll come running." "Who said anything about breaking them?" Jay asked, reaching forward, turning the knob about halfway and giving it a shove. The window swung silently outward. "Touché." I rolled my eyes and slid by them, dropping the couple feet to the ground with ease. I turned to help Dave out as the others followed. So far, at least, Rees seemed to have not caught on to this plan. "This way," Kira murmured, and we set off. We kept Dave in the middle, and Bry brought up the rear. We slipped quietly to the shadow of the next building and crept along it as quickly as we could. As we rounded the corner, I spotted some of Rees's goons lurking further down at what was presumably the back door. It suddenly sank in that after 2 horribly long months, we were free. I clamped down on the urge to cheer and do a victory dance, contenting myself with a nice big smile instead. We kept to the shadows, creeping past what Bri informed me in a breathless whisper was the Blue Parrot Inn, before we were able to cross across the main road and were finally fully out of sight of Rees and his men. "What now?" Jay asked once we were all safely down the street. We split up. It's easier for small groups to hide, and they'll be looking for 5 adults and a child. Kira will take Stella and Jay. David and Jez will come with me. Stella tightened her grip around Dave's shoulders. "We'll take good care of him, Stella," I said quietly. "Promise, we'll get there safely." She nodded, hugging her brother quickly before giving him a gentle shove over to us. I took his hand. Bri thrust his chest out and marched forward. For the 3rd time that night, I rolled my eyes, and Dave let out a nervous giggle as we followed. "So, how's the memory?" I asked quietly as we fell in step with him, Dave between us. "Better. Not perfect. It's really spotty for a decent portion of my life, but it's not gone anymore, which feels amazing." "I bet. It's amazing to be having a conversation with you. You've no idea." "Oh, but I do. I'm a stellar conversationalist, and as such, all conversations with me should be truly savored." I jabbed my elbow into his ribs. He grinned, unperturbed. Then he sobered abruptly. "Soldiers approaching. 3 o'clock. Hide the sword." How was I supposed to do that? But then I saw that he subtly reached down and pushed the point of the scabbard down so it ran parallel to his leg. I did the same, hoping it was quick enough in the dim light. Dave's grip on my hand tightened to the point of being painful. I squeezed it reassuringly as best I could. "Evening," one of the soldiers said, looking us over. "Evening, sir," Bri said, cool as a cucumber. "Get back to your house. We're clearing the roads. There are bad folk about." I almost snorted at that very detailed description. "Yes, sir. We're only a couple blocks away from our apartment." "And get there on the double," another said gruffly. "Yes, sir," I said, making a show of steering Dave and Bri away. I could feel the boy shaking under my hand. "You okay, kid?" He nodded. "Are we going to have to do that again?" "Quite possibly. Just keep your head down and let us do the talking," Bri said softly. "Where are we headed?" "Across town, so a distance, unfortunately, and we can't take the most direct route." "Why so far? There must be a safe house closer." "Kira's brother is there. There isn't a safer house. And they're leaving with us." "They?" "Her brother's friend works for the Freedom Fighters. He sends a lot of message to Cavern Hall. Is Call?" I knew the name, of course. Call was our foremost source for Greensward and Oakbridge news. The man seemed to get everywhere and into everything. It was truly impressive. I nodded and let Bri direct our path. It took well over an hour before we finally reached a nice-looking row house. It was dark, the shutters drawn tight. Bri looked both ways, then hopped up the stairs and knocked 3 times on the door. He paused, and did it again. Only then did I hear the lock click and the door swing open. A man I didn't know stood there. Come in, he said, herding us through the door. "Is anyone else here?" Bri asked. "Kira and your other 2 friends from the prison just got here. Colin's getting them set up in the kitchen with a snack." My brain didn't immediately catch on the name. Then Bri spoke again. "Thanks, Benton." "Really, Ben is fine." Benton and Kira. Benton and Kira. Walters! Colin! I shoved past Benton and raced towards the sound of faint voices, skidding to a stop in the doorway of a well-lit kitchen in the back of the house. "You made it!" Stella said. The man at the stove turned at her voice, and then he froze as he spotted me, eyes going wide in shock, and he dropped the bowl he was holding with a crash. "Jasmine?" he breathed. A second later, I was hugging my brother tightly. "You're alive! You're alive!" he shot back, clinging just as hard. "What the hell, Jasmine?" "You 2 know each other?" Kira asked, startled. "From before?" Stella added. She'd obviously picked up on the use of my full name. I pulled back a little to reassure myself that Colin was really alive and standing right in front of me. "This is Colin, my brother," I explained, as Benton, Jay, and Dave caught up to me. "How are you here?" Colin demanded, giving me a little shake. "It's a bit of a long story." Stella burst out laughing. "A bit? Jez, it took you over a month to tell it." Brief version? I didn't die on my way back home, and I was rescued by the Freedom Fighters." "Sufficiently brief," Bri said in the ensuing silence. "What about you?" "I didn't die when the 3 invaded Northwind, started working for the Freedom Fighters, and then I moved here with Ben because Kira was already here." "Jez wins," Jay muttered to Stella. She hit him. I hugged Colin again. "I can't believe you're Call. I have written to you, you asshole. Why didn't you ever tell Bo who you were?" "It didn't seem particularly important." "The support of a duke would have been nice," Jay piped up, already holding onto Stella's hand, like he expected her to try and hit him again. "I've helped how I can," Benton said, "but your point is valid. Perhaps I should have done more. I have left most of the hard work to Colin." "Ben's also recognizable. He's the spitting image of his father, so he needed to lie low," Colin said. That's why we have Cavern Hall, I said, but couldn't bring myself to care too much. I had Colin now, and Bry said they were living with us, so I wouldn't have to leave him behind. We're coming now, Benton offered tentatively, even as we heard a knock back towards the front door. I'll get it, Kira said, and slipped by. Jasmine, if you let go, I'll finish getting all of you a snack. Prison food couldn't have been very good. It was bland and icky, Dave said. Jez, I said at the same time. Still felt weird to hear my full name from anyone, but even though Colin had never called me anything else, it somehow felt even weirder coming from him. My brother blinked. What? I go by Jez now. Jasmine was supposed to be dead and all, and the last person to call me that was Colonel Rees at the jail, and I'd rather not remember that. I did let go, since my stomach was rumbling at the thought of food. Jez, he repeated, trying it out. A moment later, something rammed into my side, and I stumbled a couple steps. Thank the gods you're all right, Rye. I managed to twist in her hug to return it, spotting Jessie similarly engulfing Jay in a big hug. I heard you went to make things go boom without me, Jay pouted, without missing a beat. You'll survive, James. Damn, you can use that in the open now, can't you? Jessie kissed him on the cheek. You bet. We're fine, Rye, I told her. All right, Kira said. Introductions before we try and get ourselves out of Greensward. She quickly went around and gave everyone's name and a couple-word background as Colin passed out a simple meal of fruit, cheese, and bread. Even as basic as it was a welcome change. Then, Kira turned to Jessie and Rye. How long do we have? Rye did some quick mental math. Half hour, tops? Good. If we leave now, that should give us enough time to be close to the northern gate when it goes up. Everyone ready? I nodded. We made everyone a bag with essentials, Colin said, distributing them. Bry and Kira each got 2 that looked plumper than ours. Kira caught my gaze and smiled, almost embarrassed. We've had a lot of time to collect things. No judgment here, I said. I'll take the lead. Bry, Kira, I want you 2 in the back. Stay close and stick to the shadows, Colin told us. Bry saluted. I fell in step with my brother as we slipped out the back door. The streets had been quiet before, but now the entire city was silent. Did Kira tell you that Colonel Rees knows we escaped? Yeah, in brief. Trust you to screw up something like that. Ha ha, I muttered. Looks like they're trying to lock down the city. Probably, but hopefully your friend's explosion will provide enough of a distraction we can sneak out. Do you really believe that? He shot me a cocky grin that I remembered all too well from our childhood. There are other ways to get out of the city than the gates, if need be. Then why are we trying for the gates at all? Kira and Ben hate small spaces, and it'd be much quicker if we get out via the gates. We'll assess when we see what we're up against. I nodded. We'd hurried down the dark and quiet streets. Twice we had to duck into alleys to avoid being spotted by groups of soldiers. When we neared the gate, Colin held up a hand, motioned for us to stay, soundlessly disappearing out of sight. Considering the fact the last time I'd seen him he'd still been as noisy as 6 horses while doing anything, the stealthy ability caught me a little off guard. I knew I'd learned new tricks, but somehow it hadn't occurred to me that I might not be the only one. Within minutes he was back, frowning. It's pretty heavily guarded, and I think it includes the lovely Colonel. So what do we do now? How long until your explosion? He asked Ryan and Jessie, who were right behind us. 10 minutes, maybe? Probably less. All right, Colin said. We'll wait until the explosion. Greensward citizens aren't so well trained they won't come piling out to see what's going on. They certainly did with that last set. You're welcome, Jay said. Stella hit him again, and he pouted at her. And hopefully in the confusion, the Colonel will be distracted and we can sneak out. Everyone good with trying this? The gates were still open? Benton asked. Still open, he agreed. That made me a little uneasy. Even if it would be easier to sneak out with the gates open, if Rees was there, he had a plan to recapture us. I wasn't sure I liked our odds, considering he had somehow figured out our escape plan. Still, none of us protested. I would face Rees head-on if this was the chance to get out of this god-forsaken city. After all, I'd almost killed him while unarmed and held captive. I thought my odds well armed with backup couldn't be that bad. Colin had us backtrack and take another route until he gestured forward and crouched at a corner, peering around it. I followed, peeking over him. Ahead stretched an open area to the gate, which was heavily guarded. It took a minute of searching to locate Rees, who stood facing our direction, talking to 2 other men. There's the Colonel, Colin murmured. I put my hand on his shoulder and squeezed. Behind me, I heard Jessie quietly giving an approximate countdown. Less than 30 seconds after her 0, a tremendous boom ripped through the air. I spun in time to see a rather large fireball explode into the sky. God's breath! You 2 do nothing by halves, do you? Benton said, eyes wide. Jessie grinned, even as she high-fived Rye without having to look. It's not the freedom fighter way. That is one hell of a distraction, Kira agreed. Boom, Jay said solemnly. Look, Colin hissed. I peeked back out. Rees was directing at least half his soldiers to head towards the palace. He also turned, though, and yelled something at the guard house. A second later, I spotted a figure move at the top of the gate, and the large wooden obstacle began to creak shut. Not good, my brother said. No, it was most certainly not. Still, people began to pour out of the houses and buildings around us. Act natural, Colin said, but I saw him cross his fingers as he straightened and strolled out into the open area. I stayed at his far side, keeping his body between me and Rees. Still, something gave us away because two things happened simultaneously. The gate ground to a halt only halfway shut, still almost 7 feet off the ground, and two, one of the soldiers shouted and pointed our way. I heard Colin curse. There was no way we could make it as far as the gate without having to fight. I drew my sword as Stella put Dave behind her. Jay joined her, followed quickly by Jessie and Rye, forming a shield. Rees yelled something and his men didn't press us, merely cutting us off from the gate. Rees jogged forward until he stood at the front edge of his men. I did a quick mental count. They only outnumbered us about 2 to 1. I was willing to test those odds. I see you found some additional allies, Jez, Rees said. Some potentially powerful allies, he added, as he caught sight of Benton. Just goes to show you're fighting on the losing side, Trigger, I said, spreading my hands. Don't suppose you'd be up for some surrendering. I promise we'd treat you better than you treated us. Colin glanced briefly at me as if trying to spot the injuries. In the dim light of the house and the darkness of the streets, he'd probably even barely noticed the old scars, let alone the fresh bumps. Rees laughed. As tempting as that offer is, Jez, I'm going to pass. Men, I prefer Jasmine, James, and the Duke alive, please. And send someone to figure out why the gate has stopped. Yes, sir, a particularly large man said, the same size as the brutes from the jail, and the soldiers advanced, weapons drawn. One man peeled off and raced for the gate. Reese's eyes traversed the group again. I figured out the Bry was likely Brighton and certainly one of yours, but not that he and James were brothers. He spoke like they weren't standing right behind me. And Kira. Now I see the Walters look. Beyond feeling she looked a little familiar, I didn't make the connection. And this must be Colin. Commander Dacamar knew he and Benton were part of the Freedom Fighters. My brother offered a slight but flourished bow. Right in one. Pretty pathetic you didn't see a family resemblance between Bry and me, though, Jay said dryly. He had a point. His soldiers were past him and moving faster. So you're a coward now, I asked mildly. But then, that shouldn't surprise me. You were always hiding behind Juke and Kilgore. His expression darkened as I brought up my sword. How about it, Trigger? You and me. Jasmine, Colin murmured warningly. I didn't bother to correct him this time. Rees studied me for a second, then pulled his from the scabbard, giving it a fancy twirl. As if sensing his agreement, his soldiers parted, clashing with Colin and the others, allowing me to slide between them to confront Rees. From the instant our swords met, I was on the defensive, blocking and parrying his strikes and focusing on not losing any ground. I didn't want to risk him pushing me into his own men and getting jumped from behind. But as we fought, I became slowly aware that he worked in a very obvious pattern. A pattern I knew well from Bo. Rees had either been trained by a high castle or by someone who had been. Where'd you learn to fight? I asked, hoping to distract him. The army. The Tyran army? He caught my strike and turned it aside. I had to spin quickly to stay balanced and keep myself protected. Yes. So you're a traitor as well as a coward. I should have known. His jaw clenched and he threw out a wild shot. I blocked, then threw out a quick fist, catching him in a sensitive spot on the shoulder. He jerked in surprise and quickly backed away to reset himself. You fight dirty. You're one to talk, I said, pressing my advantage. Still, if he was as traditionally trained as it appeared, I had the upper hand. Even so, I wouldn't put it past Rees to also know hand-to-hand combat, although he'd stay out of the prison beatings. He recovered quickly and managed to keep me back, but I pressed, preventing him from setting the pace. I kept my eye on his form, waiting for an opening, but I could feel myself tiring already. My stamina had been sapped from the 2 months of limited activity, and I was still pretty banged up from the brute's tender mercies. I knew I had to end this soon. I almost missed it when it finally came. He chopped at me with some serious strength, as if not expecting me to dodge instead of block, and he lurched forward with the weight of the strike. Out of instinct, I spun back, and in surprise, watched my sword go deep into his chest. He gasped, eyes bugging, and his sword dropped out of suddenly nerveless fingers. He wasn't the first person he'd killed, but he was the first I'd known, and even though I hated him, I also respected him for his intelligence. He stumbled back, ripping my sword from my fingers, and toppled over onto his back. With one final, pitiful breath, he went limp. I didn't move, the noises of the fighting slowly filtering in, now that my focus could expand past my own battle. I stepped up to him, staring down at his now sightless eyes. He'd been a soldier once. One of our soldiers. A high castle soldier. I pulled my sword out, wiping it on my pants. May the gods take you, Trigger Rees, I said quietly, and then made myself return to the events at hand. Most of Rees's soldiers were down, but I had a view of the main avenue to the gate, and I could see another group hurrying our way. Time to go, I yelled, checking to make sure the gate hadn't shut in the meantime. By some miracle, it still sat open, as the soldier that had gone to check on it had apparently failed. I tried to remember if we had another ally in Greensward. I assumed we had some, but if this had been part of the plan, one of the others would have told us. Colin dodged aside and grabbed a soldier around the neck. He did something else so quick I didn't see it, and then the man dropped limply. Bry spun and took out the man fighting Jay, and suddenly we were free. Who organized the gate to be open? Colin asked as the rest of them joined me and we hurried towards the gate. Everyone denied responsibility, shaking heads. Someone must have, Colin said, slowing as if nervous of a trap. God's breath, Rye breathed suddenly at my side. Look! She pointed towards the small structure that housed the gate mechanism. I followed her finger and spotted the familiar form standing next to it. Is that? McRose, she confirmed with an unidentifiable note in her voice. Noting that we'd spotted him, Jackson McRose stepped forward, the distant firelight flickering over his face. I could get no read from the lieutenant, but something seemed to pass between him and Rye, because after a second she nodded. We can go. He won't stop us. Benton looked between them. Are you sure? Is he a friend? Rye pressed her lips together for a second. He's not exactly an enemy, she said, and offered a surprisingly militaristic salute in Jackson's direction. Then she jogged towards the gate. I glanced back. The other soldiers were only a couple blocks away now. Depending on Jackson's next actions, it could be a long, long night. I hurried after her, and that seemed to be enough for the others. Shortly, we were all outside the gate. At was one, we risked a glance back up at the wall top. Jackson had turned to watch us. He offered a crisp salute in return, and then reached over and did something with the gate mechanism. The gate crashed down with a thud that shook the ground. Not only did it seal us out of Greensward, but more importantly, it sealed the soldiers in. That thud was one of the best sounds I'd ever heard in my life. We were free, and there was no going back. Come on, Rye said. Jessie and I will lead, since most of you have never been. A minute later, we were trudging along the rutted and snowy path heading north, back to Cavern Hall, and back to freedom. Sorin became distantly aware of a heavy pounding. It took longer for Calip's shrill voice to sink in. Sir, you need to wake up, sir! Go away, Sorin shot back, rolling over and reaching to pull his pillow over his head. It was a rare morning he slept until dawn, and he'd been planning on treasuring the extra hours. It wasn't as early as some nights, but it was still dark out. The prisoners in Greensward, sir! They've escaped! That woke him right up, and he rolled out of bed, snagging his pants and the shirt from the day before. How? Lieutenant McRoos is here to report to you and General Oakland. He just arrived from Greensward. Sorin tugged his shirt over his head, pausing thoughtfully. This was an unexpected turn of events, but not as unlikely as many, like Vlad, might have thought. Jasmine and James had both proved themselves incredibly resourceful, and it didn't particularly surprise him that they'd managed to effect an escape, or rescue. In a way, he was more surprised that it had taken 2 months. He pulled open the door. Where's Jackson? The conference room, sir. Bert went to wake the general. Good, Sorin said, and took off at a jog. The door was open, but no sounds issued forth, meaning Vladimir hadn't arrived yet. Sorin slowed and stepped inside. Jackson sat at the table, elbows resting on the surface and hands covering his face. His hands and arms were bright red, as if from sunburn, and darted with dark splotches like soot. The lieutenant hadn't looked this young, even with his face hidden, in a long time. Not since Vladimir had all but shanghaied him into the cause. Vladimir should be here any moment. Jackson started and hastily scrambled up. Removing his hands didn't help the disheveled look. His face was smeared with a black substance that had to be soot. Sorry, sir. Didn't hear you. He sounded exhausted. It's quite all right. Sit. You don't need to hop back up when Vladimir gets here, nor will I ask you to start your report until then. Jackson flashed him a smile. Thanks. Sorin sat down across from him, leaning back in the chair and stifling a yawn. Despite the news, he still felt half asleep. Or maybe because of the news. The winds were changing. Vladimir burst into the room a couple minutes later, shirt not even buttoned. What the hell happened? Jackson shot to his feet anyway, saluting. The freedom fighter prisoners are gone, sir. All 4 of them. The Greensward Palace is as good as gone and was still burning when I left. Colonel Rees is dead, sir. Vladimir stared at him. Sorin did too, as he carefully processed each of these 3 large pieces of information. The winds indeed. How did this happen? It was Colonel Rees, sir. He suspected the prisoners were planning some sort of breakout. He surrounded the jail after the escape attempt had started, so he could capture the rescuers as well, but he'd forgotten about the windows in his office, so they escaped his net. He then initiated a citywide search for them around the midnight bells. We had already mostly cleared the streets before the escape, so we started searching house to house in targeted areas while adding extra guards to the gates. Okay, and? Vladimir prompted impatiently. Jackson had barely had time to take a breath. In the midst of the search, the palace just... I've never seen an explosion like it. There was a whoosh, and pieces landed half the city away. He gestured ineffectually. Most of it was gone before we even knew what happened. Interesting choice of payback to cover for Jasmine Lockholm's escape, Sorin murmured. Vladimir glared at him. Sorin was pretty sure he didn't miss the ghost of a smile on Jackson's face, as he ignored his brother. Colonel Rees sent a large portion of his forces, including those at the gate he was guarding, to try and save what was left and put out the fires. An effective diversion, certainly, What happened next? Sorin asked. We failed to keep the explosion away from the armory and the fresh store of balstic stone. Then it was absolutely certain little of the palace remained, not after a secondary explosion of a large magnitude. That was a shame. It's been a beautiful old building. Vladimir clenched his fists. It was just starting to be contained when reports came of the escape. I left Lieutenant Jeffers in charge and went to investigate and find Colonel Rees for further orders. I found the colonel and his remaining men all dead, just inside the gate, and the gate shut, but undefended. And you saw Rees's body. Yes, sir, Jakium said. This isn't good, Vladimir muttered and began to pace. How was Rees killed? Stab wound in his chest. Probably was fatal almost instantly, Jakium said. As soon as I saw that, I sent the men with me back to report to tell Jeffers I was leaving straight from there to come here to report. But they had to have been mere hours ago, Sorin said, startled as he did the math, guessing it to be about the 5 bells now, maybe a bit later. Jakium had left well after midnight, and 4 hours from Greensward to Oakbridge, especially at night in the winter, was fast. I stopped only when I'd burned out a horse and could find a new one, Jakium said. I thought you'd want to know as soon as possible. Of course we did, Vladimir said. Well done, Jakium, Sorin said quietly, catching the young man's eye. He nodded, exhaustion clear on his dirty face. He hadn't sat back down. Well done, Vladimir exploded, catching it anyway. Nothing about that was well done. And that most certainly isn't Jackson's fault, Sorin retorted, standing as well. If this is any one person's fault, it would be Rees, and I rarely like to speak ill of the dead. Jakium, you're dismissed. Go get yourself cleaned up and rest. Stop by my office whenever you wake up. I'd like to talk to you about a few things. Yes, sir, Jakium said in relief, and hastily scooted from the room before Vladimir could countermand the order. His brother turned on him. You don't give the orders. Sorin pinched his nose. Do we have to have this conversation again, Vladimir? Because I'm pretty sure you don't want to lose again. The glare was back twofold. This is a disaster. That we can agree on, he said calmly, pressing his palms into the table. Vladimir whirled away and paced the length of the room and back before stopping. I'm leaving. That had not been on the list of things Sorin expected to hear. What? To where? To find the prisoners and retrieve them. Sorin had not had enough sleep for his brother's insanity. Before you do that, let me see if we can sort this out, he suggested. Fine, Vladimir grumbled. Why are they so important? Because they're the only freedom fighters we've managed to catch alive. Okay, and what have they told us? Their leader's name, Vladimir said promptly. Okay, and? His brother opened his mouth and then shut it again, brow furrowing. Exactly. And our best interrogator is now dead, so I doubt anyone else would manage to get any further. Plus, I think the freedom fighters have well proven themselves able to hide in the wilderness where we can't find them. Clearly Jasmine and James had help, as there's no way they could have escaped and blown up the palace all at about the same time. They killed Rees, Vladimir said, like it was a trump card. Sorin studied his brother silently. Rees had once had the potential to be a good man. He'd been a rising star in the Tyran army before Vladimir had seduced him away. Sorin wasn't sure what kind of man he'd really been when he died. Yes, which is a shame, but Rees's own cockiness killed him just as much. He attempted to defeat Jasmine, Jay, and some number of their allies with only about a dozen men. Doesn't he remember how easily they escaped Jackson's attempt at West Corner? I have no doubt that this was the same group, or at least most of it, and Jackson is far more competent than it sometimes appears. But they still need to pay. Granted, Sorin started patiently, but was interrupted by a knock on the half-open door. Yes? Cal poked his head in. Lieutenant McRose asked me to tell you he remembered something after he left. Smart of Jackson not to put himself back in Vladimir's sight. A local innkeeper, from an inn just a couple doors down from the prison, and frequent stop for many of our soldiers, said 3 of his employees left a note saying they had to leave last night. He only knew so soon because he went to check on the inn after the fire. Oh, Sorin said. I don't suppose he provided names, or even genders. 3 women, 2 in their 20s, 1 in their late teen, a Jessica and Ryan Smith, as well as a Kira Ricker. Kira had been with him for a couple of years, but the other 2 for not very long, and had said from the beginning they were only there temporarily. Lieutenant McRose also said that one citizen did admit to seeing the fight, and said there were about 10 escapees, including 1 boy and a pretty even mix of men and women. Thank you, Callup. Yes, sir, the man said, and disappeared. See, there's 3 named allies right there, plus another 3, possibly all male. Clearly this Jessica and Ryan, or whatever their real names are, were sent to help Jasmine and James escape. Still, something else itched at him. There was something he should be getting from those facts. It's a shame Jackson didn't run into them at this inn. He might have recognized them. All the more reason to go after them. We could get even more prisoners. Sorin stared at him, but gave up. At least with Vladimir out of Oakbridge for a while, things might be calmer. And Annie less likely to hide all day with Ren. Maybe. Very well. Good luck. I'll keep track of things while you're gone. He had no expectations that Vladimir would actually find them. They were already long gone. I'll be leaving later today. he said as he turned to leave. Vlad, his brother glanced back. Be careful, and stay safe. Something flickered in his expression. You too, Sorin. He watched Vladimir leave and took a deep breath. Then he headed for his office. There would be no sleep after this. Once there, he sorted through the papers until he came upon the file on Denham Lockholm and his family. He read through it again slowly, making sure he didn't miss a detail. The file was heavy on Denham's prime and his friendship with Robert Walters and Patrick Highcastle. He skimmed it, once again pulling out the pertinent details. The man had a mind for tactic and raising horses, and he had his 5 children. He switched files. And there it was, what he'd forgotten. A Colin who had gotten Benton out and was no question working for the freedom fighters. He stopped. Benton Walters, the elder Walters child. The younger was named Kira. Kira Walters. No, he breathed. Could Kira Walters have been living under their noses for 2 years with only a fake last name to throw them off? Caleb, he bellowed, knowing the man was never far. A minute later, the man appeared in the doorway. Yes, sir? Is this absolutely everything we have in the Lockholm family? Yes, sir, as far as I know. I'd like the files on the Walters family. Can you do that for me? Of course, sir. Shouldn't take too long to retrieve them. Everything? Everything. As soon as possible. Also, as soon as Jackson is back upright, send him to see me if you run into him. We need to talk. Yes, sir, the man vanished. Within the hour, after Sorin had gone over the Lockholm papers yet again without finding anything new, Caleb was back with a thicker file, which he passed to him. Anything else, sir? Not right now, thank you. The man nodded and made himself scarce. Sorin skimmed the Walters family history until he got to a year before their forces had attacked Northwind. Then he slowed. Kira Walters had fought with their parents and left, disappearing from all sight. If that had indeed been Kira Walters, then it was very possible that Colin and Benton had made their way to Greensward to be near her, and had, just hours before, helped Jasmine and the others kill Rees and escape Greensward. He sat back, running a hand over his mouth as he stared out the window without really seeing, other than the note had gotten light out at some point. Maybe, once Vladimir had returned empty-handed, he should pay Denham Lockholm a visit and see what he knew of his children's miraculous escapes from death.